Hello and welcome to my studio. Well, we're being extremely festive today. Fall isn't just my favorite time of the year, but Halloween is my all-time favorite holiday. And I thought I would celebrate by doing something a little special and different on the channel, reading a small little excerpt from one of my favorite horror authors. The thing cannot be described. There is no language for such abyss of shrieking and immoral lunacy, such eldritch contradictions of all matter, force, and cosmic order. A mountain walked or stumbled. And that is the only direct description given to Cthulhu in H.P. Lovecraft's Call of Cthulhu. And I thought it would be a very fun challenge to do a book-style cover illustration of my favorite Lovecraft story. So join with me as we get into the cosmic horror and realm of H.P. Lovecraft. One of the challenging aspects of H.P. Lovecraft is that his creatures are beyond human comprehension, meaning they're impossible to draw, as the description I read from is the only direct account of Cthulhu by an eyewitness. There are 3 other different depictions of Cthulhu in this, and they are described with more detail. But they're not Cthulhu himself, they're actually interpretations, making it very difficult to know what Cthulhu truly is. Our brain says it kinda looks like this, but that's only because it's trying to rationalize what it's seeing before we go mad. I would actually like to read the first ever description of Cthulhu in this book, which is a painting. Above these apparent hieroglyphics was a figure of evident pictorial intent. Though its impressionistic execution forbade a very clear idea of its nature, it seemed to be a sort of monster, or symbol representing a monster, of a form which only a deceased fancy could conceive. If I say that my somewhat extravagant imagination yielded simultaneous pictures of an octopus, a dragon, and a human caricature, I shall not be unfaithful to the spirit of the thing. A pulpy, tentacled head surmounted a grotesque and scaly body with rudimentary wings, but it was a general outline of a whole which made it most shockingly frightful. And there are 2 other descriptions I would like to read as well. It represented a monster, a vague anthropod outline, but with an octopus-like head, whose face was a mass of feelers and scaly, rubbery-looking body, protruding claws on head and 4 feet, and long, narrow wings. This thing, which seemed distinct with a fearsome and unnatural malignancy, was of a somewhat bloated, corporeal, squatted, evilly thing on a rectangular block. There's also one more depiction of Cthulhu. The crouching image with its cuttlefish head, dragon body, scaly wings, and hieroglyphic pedestal. And while this depiction of Cthulhu isn't true because it's being filtered through someone else's interpretation, I do like the description, and it does make sense that this is what the general public has ran with for its depictions of Cthulhu in comics, movies, video games, and so forth. But I want to put my own spin on it. I really want to create something very unique and interesting. I have my own vision for this that I think will be really interesting and be a really fun challenge. So let's go ahead and get into what we'll be doing. And also turn on the lights because you guys won't be able to see the artwork, and that's kind of what we're all about here. Now that the lights are on and we got everything we need from our source material, we can go into talking about how we're going to bring this illustration to life. And while it's super tempting to just do a giant massive drawing of a super buff Cthulhu, that's not what I want to do. I have a very unique and interesting approach to this because oftentimes in Lovecraft's best work, the best adaptations of his work, or some things that are inspired by Lovecraft, they often employ the technique of the slow burn. This is where you take your time building and escalating things up in your story. So I think it'd be really cool to incorporate that into this drawing. Now, this is a single image, not sequential storytelling like a comic, so doing that is going to be extremely difficult. But I think I found a way. This image right here, this absolutely stunning and gorgeous landscape image caught my eye on Pinterest, and after seeing it, everything clicked into place. I'm going to do a super detailed rendering of this image. That way you focus more on the normal stuff, and then use that to guide your eye through the piece using perspective and different other elements to Cthulhu. That way you have that slow burn effect I'm going for. It still has the cosmic horror, but also has the humanity and the human aspects of it, like his stories, and as I mentioned, many of the best adaptations of his work. I think that's going to be the best approach to this, and it's going to be a fun challenge considering most of the times if I do illustrate landscapes, they're cities and urban settings. I love doing comic art, so most of the time I draw cities. I very rarely do more organic landscapes, but this is going to be a really fun, really cool challenge that I think will be really interesting interesting to do. Now, in terms of how we'll be bringing this illustration to life, we'll be using two different mediums, ink and gouache. And you know I'm already having a lot of fun because ink and gouache are my two favorite mediums. And since this is the big Halloween special, not just any sheet of Bristol that's 18 by 24 will do. No, we need something bigger, more impressive, and more challenging. So I went out and got a 22 by 30, 100% cotton, hot press watercolor paper to do our work on. So let's go ahead and see what our pencils are looking like. And here are our pencils, and not only are they super big and super detailed, they're also super blue, and that's because I use two different tools when I sketch, a Prismacolor non-photo blue for gesturing, and a Pilot soft blue to solidify those gestures. And yes, this is 10 hours of work. I did not stutter. Let's get a close-up on it so you see all the detail. I have committed 10 hours to this project before I even started filming. That's how you can tell I'm super excited and passionate about this project. I cannot wait to see how this looks. We're going to go for a Bernie Wrightson approach, especially with his Frankenstein work and the inking, and we're going to do what we can to really make this something special. So let's go ahead and roll that super time lapse. Talk about a challenge. This is a piece where I really push myself, and one of the major influences for this piece was the great master himself, Bernie Wrightson, one of the greatest inkers in all of art. Not just comics, but art as a whole. This man stands as a master among masters and was my major influence for this piece. While I'm in no way saying that I am close to his level, I am saying that I really was inspired by his work and took the lessons that I learned from studying his work and applied it into this piece right here. I am using every single tool in my tool belt, and I've explained before my philosophy of inking many times on the channel, but if you're new here, I'm going to say it one more time. For me, inking is not tracing. I am taking my pencils and I solidifying them in a way where they will look as good as they can look for the final product or the final print, or just for this next step of the piece. I'm not copying every single line slavishly. I'm actually adding extra lines or changing things, but that is something that I have to stress because a good inker knows that you are not tracing, you are adding to the artwork, you are solidifying it, you are making it look as good as you can make it. Now, with that said though, something I want to point out is I had really tight pencils, mainly because I knew what I wanted for this piece and I wanted to do all my thinking during my penciling phase when I was developing the ideas and the concepts. I didn't want to have to make last minute decisions that could ruin this piece. I wanted to make sure that everything was playing out, everything was methodical. So while I did do really heavy penciling, I was still not afraid to go in and change what I needed to do if it was necessary. So it's a bit of a balancing act, especially if you're inking your own work. You kind of have an idea of things and you can use that to really set yourself up to succeed in your inking phase. Now for this piece, I used every single tool at my disposal. I used combinations of hatching, cross-hatching, and even stippling, something I normally don't use. I also made sure to overlay my cross-hatching in ways that I've never done before, going in really heavy different directions, not just up and down, but left, right, cross, and center. I was really going all over the place. I was making sure I was using my raised ruler so I wouldn't have any bleeding, and I was experimenting with a couple new techniques, including a very interesting type of gray wash. Not a traditional ink wash where I watered down my inks. No, I took a Copic 003 fine liner, angled it just right, and used it to add a gray to a couple different select values, mainly the wood planks, but also here and there in a few different grass areas and a few different parts of the mountain, and even in the lighthouse, because it was a great way to actually change the color of the paper to gray without having any intense black lines. So it created a beautiful extra addition to the ink work I was doing. Combining that with my 005 micron for extra detail here and there, I was able to create some beautiful textures, really good values. I also played with a couple of the different solid and white values. I really made sure that I was very smart and precise with it, only leaving 100% white for the sky and 100% black for a few select areas, and for the most amount of black on the page being where Cthulhu is, and keeping the eyes white for that pop of value. It was really good because I had all these different grays that guide the eye through the piece with the extreme perspective I played off of to Cthulhu, giving that slow burn effect that I was mentioning I wanted to get with this piece. I am so proud with how this piece came out. The inks look amazing. The entire thing was super fun. It was an incredible challenge. I love how this piece came out. And while we're only halfway there, we are ready for a bit of a little break before we get into the coloring phase. So let's go ahead and get into what we have already. So our inks are done. They are drying off page. We will do a mini reveal, but I actually want to talk about why I am specifically not using my dip pen. This project here is so big, it's already going to take a lot of time. And while the dip pen, in my opinion, is the best tool for inking, I'm using other tools and I have to use quite a few to really substitute that. So for one, I'm using these Pentel brush pens. These are really good because it's pretty much the closest thing you're ever going to get to a brush dipped in ink on the go. Really nice to use, and the ink in here is waterproof, which is what I needed for this project. I've also been using microns and Tombos. This is a Tombow Funanusuke, which is really good because it has a flexible plastic nib. I've also been using a ton of microns. This one is a 08. I'm pulling inspiration from Bernie Wrightson, who's one of the greatest inkers of all time. time, so I'm really trying to emulate parts of his style and his decision making when it comes to the inking phase. But I absolutely love what I have, so before we go to covering in gouache, I have to do a little bit of a mini reveal of the inks itself. Seriously, this is shaping up to be one of my favorite pieces I've ever done, and we're only halfway done. The inks look amazing, but now we gotta do the coloring. And I already took the liberty of printing out my little reference sheet so that I can have a visual guide as to what my color scheme is. I already have it planned out. I even went ahead and took my favorite palette and decided to go in and do some color mixing already. This is gonna be really good because not only my colors pre-picked, so I have my palette already figured out, but I picked them so that they will all go together, allow me to go and create natural tones with blending, and it's gonna help me stay consistent so that I'm not making any last minute decisions. This is one of my favorite palettes because it's airtight, so I can lock this whole thing and it will keep them fresh pretty much for like 24 hours, which is super nice. We're gonna go in and do the coloring. Don't know how long this process will take, but I have a feeling it won't take as long as the inks. We'll see. Let's go ahead and roll that time lapse one more time. So I thought inking this piece would be the challenge, but coloring it was a whole nother ball game. I really pushed my understanding of both color theory and color mixing to its absolute limit, but I love what I got. First things first, I went in with a base of purple. In case you're new to my techniques of doing gouache and watercolor work, I'm a huge fan of washes and glazing to really build up those values and tones in a subtle way to create more energy and realism in my pieces. So base of purple served two purposes. For one, it did a good job adding a coolness to everything to go with that darker palette I was looking for, but also it's the opposite of green, which was going to be a major focal point and color in this piece, and it was also a complementary color to red, which I wanted to use for the sky, and blue for the ocean. So purple was a really good color to go with. Mixed up a bit of Moonglow by Daniel Smith and a little bit of Iris by Holbein, put them together, thinned them down, and went like crazy with my giant wash brush. Something I want to note is that the ink that I used on Cthulhu for some reason smeared. I don't know why. It had plenty of time to dry, but I actually really liked the effect it gave, and it helped to go with that whole beyond comprehension and ethereal eldritch look, so it was a happy accident. It was really nerve-wracking at first, but it came together really well. I then decided to just build up my different values and tones, and while initially I was switching brushes on the fly quite regularly, I found that when I switched to my quill, that pretty much became the majority of the brush that I used for this project. It was really good to not only get large areas, but also detail work, and it was great to just use to build up different layers. The fact that it's so big and versatile and can hold a lot of water made it the ideal brush. While I did use a couple others here and there, that one really was the main brush for this project and really pulled out to be the MVP. Now, I used a couple different techniques for this piece. For one, I used my wet on dry technique, which is my preferred favorite technique with watercolor and gouache, mainly because it gives me a lot of control for the coloring. But I also used a lot of wet on wet, including some experimental wet on dried ink techniques, where I wanted to go with an ethereal, beyond human comprehension, and just eldritch, chaotic look for Cthulhu. It worked really well and added a subtleness to everything that just adds to his look, especially using it and concentrated in the eyes, really added a glow and pop to everything. It's one of the few instances of bright colors in this piece, and it looks so good, adding a menacing glow to everything. I also want to mention that I did use a couple of wet into wet techniques with the grass, really going in and building up those values, adding a lot of yellows into the piece, a lot of browns. Mixing these urban colors together was a challenge, but I had a lot of fun. I really pushed myself with it. Plus, I also used other techniques that I normally don't use. For example, when I use splatter in my artwork, I always use the credit card technique, but I found that this time using the toothbrush technique was far better. It worked a lot on the water in this piece to add that energy and impact to it, and it was really fun building up the different values and tones. I really took my time building everything up. The longest part of this project was the grass, to be honest, mainly because I had so many different layers of greens that I was putting in. I mixed in probably 5 to 6 different types of greens and different shades of greens just to get the grass to look just right, and I was also really nervous when I put the first initial layer of green because it was so bright. After getting the darker tones in, it really started to feel unified and together, and I had my reference image I was using constantly for coloring to make sure that everything was good and going the way I wanted. But a lot of it too was also just deciding where I wanted things to be or how I wanted things to look. I knew that my reference image had a lot of brightness to it, so I wanted to play off of that in the opposite by adding coolers and darker tones. That's why I did the base of purple. So going in and just mixing in dark greens where I was putting in blues and putting in purples and putting in even in like yellow orange just to get it to look just right was super fun. My reference image kind of mirrored in my mind to be exactly what I needed, and while I feel like it came to life in a really cool way, I also can't help to think the next time I do this, I'm gonna be able to make it even better. I'm already super hyped for the next big project that we're going to do because I love pushing myself as an artist, and this was me pushing myself in a new way, doing this organic color mixing, doing these natural tones, working in ways that I normally don't do with gouache and watercolor, where I'm working in a large scale. I'm not doing a character, I'm not doing a city environment, I'm doing a natural organic environment. It's very different from what I normally do, but building up those tones and values, using my washes, using my glazes, going in and putting in the solid colors when I need to, just created something that I am so proud of. I can go on and on about all the different techniques I use, the layering, the wet on wet, and so much more. This is a project where I'm using every tool in my tool belt. I am mixing colors so much. Like, most of this time lapse is me mixing the colors, and I had a couple of little extra pieces of paper that I taped to the side of my board so that I could just test the colors to see what they look like, and that was really beneficial. I also made sure that this piece was super secured and fully taped because I knew the second I go in to apply all this different water and wet on wet techniques and wet on dry that it's gonna curl and buckle like crazy, and there are times the paper really warped, but because it was taped down, it dried completely flat. This is my favorite piece that I've painted, and I'm so proud of how it came out. So let's go ahead and get into the final stages of this project. We're almost done. Couple more steps to do. For one, we gotta go in and frame this thing, but before we do that, we have to remove it from this board right here. But before we do that, we gotta prep it for the frame. And one of the things that you need to do if you live in a high humid environment, or you're working on a piece that has some water solvent mediums, is you gotta make sure that you properly seal it. Mainly because here in Florida, we have a lot of humidity, and unfortunately, that humidity can build up in the inside of a framework, and if you're not careful, it can destroy it. So I like to go in and seal all of my gouache and watercolor paintings. This stuff right here. Your cards, Dolan's wax medium. This stuff is a miracle because you just take a cotton swab, rub it onto the painting right here, and you are perfectly sealed and protected. I even did a little bit of a test swatch right here to show you guys. I will say that it does alter the colors by about 5 to 10%, making them a little darker. I do think that it's worth it, especially for this piece where I'm going for that darker tone. We're gonna go in, add the wax to this. I'm ready to get this project all set up for the frame, so let's go ahead and do a couple more time lapses to bring this thing home for the grand reveal. I don't know if it's because I'm a 90s kid, but I really want to make a Karate Kid wax on, wax off joke, but we're going to skip it for now and just say that adding wax to this piece was super easy and didn't take that long at all, but it's a very necessary step for all the reasons I said before. I'm just here to add a little bit of commentary so you're not having a blank nothingness while you watch me apply wax onto a painting. So the wax is on this thing. We can go in and do the scary part of removing the tape. We're gonna pretend that I hit record and removed all these with no effort, and it was very satisfying. There we go. There's a couple little spots I gotta touch up, but that's very easy to do with a little bit of acrylic paint. We're gonna do the final touch-ups, frame this, and then we're ready for the grand reveal. I am so excited, guys. Here we are at the final stretch, and I am so proud of what I have made. I am so proud with how this piece came out. It is very me, but I've also pushed my craft further than I thought was honestly possible. So while you're seeing me do the final assembly, getting this thing ready for its frame, let's go ahead and finally take a look at this piece in all its finished glory. And we're done. And guys, I love how this piece came out. This is easily the most advanced illustration I have ever done. The most detailed, the most thought out, the most rendered. I am so happy with how this piece came out. Spending 50 hours, that's 50, painting Cthulhu, but I love how it came out. Not only did I pay tribute to one of my favorite horror authors of all time, H.P. Lovecraft, but I'm so happy that this was my Halloween special. Halloween is my favorite holiday ever since I was a kid, and I want to do something special for you guys. I feel like I pushed myself, that I've leveled up, that this is something that 10 years from now, I'll still be proud of this piece, and I really am happy with how it came out. Tributing H.P. Lovecraft and also pulling inspiration from Bernie Wrightson and great painters like Alex Ross, I am just blown away with what I was able to craft. And if you guys like this piece, please let me know in the comment section down below. Also, while you're down there, let me know of areas that I could improve on. While I am still so incredibly proud of this piece, I love to hear your guys' feedback because it makes me a better artist and a better content creator. And if you guys really like the piece, as always, it's available on my ArtStation account, not just for digital downloads, but also for physical posters that you can buy and hang up in your home. Both the colored and the black and white versions will be available online. Feel free to check it out. It's that first link in the description. It really does help the channel out. But seriously guys, thank you so much for following me on this journey. I am so proud of this piece. My name is J-Rod of battlebrawlerproductions. I draw with Power Melon, so I wish you all a happy Halloween. Take care, stay safe, eat a ton of candy. But as always, thank you all just so much for being with me during another artistic journey through creativity.